Shabbat Shalom. As many of you know, I studied political science and philosophy. What you may not have done for the math is realize that when I went into university in 1990, political science was in a bit of trouble because Gorbachev had just dissolved the Soviet Union, basically. Eastern Europe had collapsed as a Soviet outpost, and they were rolling up their missions to overthrow capitalism around the world, and McDonald's was taking root in Moscow. Needless to say, many of my professors had cut their teeth and made their dissertations about the Cold War. That was their bread and butter. That was as much as half or more of most political science departments around the country, if not around the world. And that meant they had to change their way of thinking, because a certain logic had taken hold in most American political science institutions during much of the middle of the 20th century. And it was called power politics. Hans Morgenthau is probably the most famous proponent of it, advisor to many presidents. Not that many presidents listen to political scientists anymore, but the basic idea was drawn from Thucydides, all the way back at the Peloponnesian War, Athens versus Sparta. Indeed, the Peloponnesian War was required reading in most political science departments, because surely we could understand the rivalry between the United States and the USSR by understanding two Greek city-states from 3,000 years ago. It made perfect sense. And the primary principle was that power was the ultimate way to understand the behavior of states. States were rational actors, and as rational actors, they would pursue their best interests according to the power dynamic at play within the international arena. If you had power, you did what you wanted. If you lacked power, you had to do what was necessary. Or as more pithily put, the strong do what they want, the weak do what they must. And this was used as a template for understanding. Why did the US go into Vietnam? Why did Russia go into Afghanistan? Why did America make alliances with Japan and West Germany right after the war? Why did the Soviet Union invade Eastern Europe and make it part of its satellite system? Power. They could, so they did, and those that couldn't stop them just had to live with it. And when someone would raise the objection that this seemed rather, ignoring the fundamental ideological differences between the USSR and the USA, that, weren't they different countries? They certainly acted like different countries. Those in the power politics and political realism camp would say, you're an idiot. You don't understand. Whatever you put on the label of your country doesn't matter. What matters are the national interests and whether they have the power to pursue them according to different levels of engagement. That the USSR would behave exactly like the USA would behave exactly like the USSR if they had the same power and capabilities and opportunities and all of those other hard numbers at play. But what about morality? Morality has no place in the international arena. Morality has no place on the battlefield. Well, I think Torah disagrees. As hopefully you picked up from the excerpt that we read from Shoftim, and as hopefully you've also noticed from reading the entirety of Shoftim and the other parshiot that surround it in this part of Devarim, actually God seems to care an awful lot about the morality of the battlefield. As a matter of fact, God seems to care about morality as the battlefield. That God is not trying to promote the Jewish people just because we're his favorite kids and he wants us to have the best spot on the planet, because there are some competing territories that might have been more relaxing and comfortable than the state of Israel, but that God instead is trying to promulgate a particular view of the world that puts morality front and center even in war. Even in war. That we must proclaim peace. We must leave a room for somebody to flee. We must not attack the trees of the field. As we saw just from the small excerpt today, we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back. Because, as always, a victory that is not in accordance with Torah is not a victory, but a defeat. God wants us to win on God's terms. Now, the realpolitik people, the power politics crew, the rational actor model does not like this conversation. They say, look, get your religion and go back to your temple. Go back to your sanctuary, your church, your shrine, wherever it may be. Talk all the religion you want. By the time we reach the level of state actors, this simply does not matter. And we say, but wait. Are you trying to tell me that you think religion is somehow only contained within places of worship? Is this the only place religion touches our soul? Is this the only place religion matters? So, religion just cares about which prayers we say on which days. Religion just cares about exactly how we make our talit and tie our tzitzit. Religion just cares about whether we eat pork or whether we don't eat pork. But when it comes to the outside world, when it comes to civil, criminal, or personal issues, religion is supposed to shut up and sit in the back of the room? No, says Torah. You may be startled to see as we go through Devarim where it is most apparent, but as a matter of fact, Judaism seems to spend an awful lot of time talking about all of those other activities, those things that are of personal, social, communal, and ethical concerns that have nothing to do with exactly which threads are in our tzitzit. Look at the different instructions that involve how we go about our business practices. If I were to go to somebody as the head of a Fortune 500 company and say, well, the Torah has a lot to teach you about how to run your business, would I be laughed out of the boardroom? Unfortunately, probably yes. If I were to go into a community center and say, the Torah has a lot to say about how we can reconcile those who come from different points of view, that there is a divine element that can bring together different communities, again, I would probably be under assault, if not mockery, for bringing such an idea forward. If I said the Torah has much to teach us about how we treat our spouses, our children, our neighbors, those that are strangers to us in the community. If I said that the definition of stranger within our community in Judaism expands well beyond just Jews I don't know, but to include non-Jews and indeed even immigrants and refugees, and that the Torah has much to say about their treatment, people would say, you're not being realistic. You're not being realistic. As much as we may laugh at the rather naive comparison between the Peloponnesian War and the Cold War and say, how could anyone possibly mistake the battle between the USSR and the USA for Athens and Sparta, recognize that we daily make that same mistake when we try to imagine that the borders of Torah exist only around this or the so-called ritual aspects of our life and do not apply in the real world. Torah is the real world. God's battlefield is the real world. God wants us to take Torah into the world and in our lives for our sake and for the world's sake. Does that mean that we browbeat others to force them to comply with our understanding of Judaism? No. Does it mean that we speak vocally when we believe that the values and principles of Judaism are being violated, even at the risk of being mocked, even at the risk of being called unrealistic, even at the risk of building up the ire of the anti-Semites for how dare we poke our head up and say, no? Yes, we do risk that. Because we must. Judaism was not given to make us warm within the comfort of a bubble beyond which it could not extend. Judaism was given so that we could build a beacon, a bonfire that would light and warm the world. And that only happens when we recognize that Judaism begins with each of us through all of us, meaning through all of our lives. When you walk out of here, not just from our Kiddush, but out of the building entirely, take with you the lessons of Torah, take with you the lessons of the Siddur, take with you the lessons of your community. Share them in the world around them. Let them guide your actions, even at the risk of being called unrealistic, even at the risk of being called naive. You may be surprised how many people resonate with the ideas of Torah. You may be surprised at the goodness in so many others that are just waiting for the opportunity to not be realistic, but to be optimistic and to aspire to something better than a repeat of the ancient wars. Shabbat Shalom.